evening, good evening. Welcome, 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 everybody. Welcome. So beautiful to see so many people on a Friday evening. Wow, and some beautiful faces that I recognize. Yes, Evelyn, bonsoir, Timea, hi there, Ilona, Kathy, Anna, Ruth. Yes, and Stacy, Virginia, fantastic. Julie, whoa, so long that I haven't seen you. That's beautiful to see you. Wow, Virginia, the other Virginia, Larissa, and everybody else who I know and I don't know. It's impossible to see you all. I've just seen Ingrid. Hi, Ingrid, and Jurga. Yeah, wow. Nazil, I see you waving. Hi, hi. And with pleasure, do let us know where you are from in the chat box so we can span the earth with beautiful energy and lots of love starting the weekend in such an amazing way. And today's topic, we've got France, we've got Tunisia, we've got Peru, we've got Paris, Madrid, Lithuania, Argentina. Wow, fantastic. Really spanning the earth. I know we've got Canada there with Kathy. And Asturias, yes, Fribourg. I think that was Oriane. I think the name just sped by. Vietnam, Don, great that you're here as well. Andrea as well from the Czech Republic. Yes, beautiful. Now, tonight's webinar is a little bit of a mix. We are going to have a first focus on pronunciation. And then we're going to move a little bit into, does neurolanguage coaching kind of come into other things like exams, like kids, like teens, like a little bit of everything. But principally, these webinars at the moment have been based on your requests. So I've been asking people in the audience to tell me what you want us to touch upon. And this particular topic of pronunciation came out. Now, the interesting thing is, I'm probably not going to be giving you new magical formulas of how to deal with pronunciation. And I also think that each and every one of you probably has your way, or not, of dealing with pronunciation. And each and every one of us are dealing with people from different languages, different sounds, different perspectives. But I want to bring it into the perspective from a coaching perspective. How do we deal with pronunciation from a coaching perspective? Because obviously, normally, in a teaching world, there are some teachers who have great, I'm going to say, focus on pronunciation, others who don't. And I think, in the coaching world, every answer should be coming from the coachee and not driven from what I think or judge to be the right way. However, on the other side, we do have the question of, okay, how do we get them into the sounds of the language? And that's where you are going to be then discovering with the coachee the way forward. Now, with pleasure, if you have any questions along the way, or if you want to interrupt or jump in, we can try to do that. I can imagine that many of you are pronunciation experts. Many of you already have a wide range of tools that you use. So I've taken it from a little bit of a different perspective. And I'm just going to open my screen so I can see the chat box at the same time. There we go. Firstly, how can neurolanguage coaching transform teachers? Well, I know that there are quite a few of you here this evening who are already neurolanguage coaches. So I know that you've already been through the transformation process and you know what it's like to really come into this different approach, different way. And it is very much the convergence. We're bringing in all the expertise from your teaching background world, expertise from many, many years for many of you. We're bringing in the professional coaching. We're bringing in the neuroscience, which could embrace neuropsychology, emotional intelligence, all of that neuro to bring in this focus point of neurolanguage coaching. And this is literally the coaching that we're bringing in: professional coach training, International Coach Federation accreditation, coaching conversations around emotional triggers, learning how to learn, improving cognitive skills, coaching competences all the way through. You're bringing in the structure of the coaching engagement and that spirit of coaching as well, the empowering, the accompanying, all the way through. And from the neuro perspective, we're definitely bringing in the principles from the neuroscience. Now, we bring in the principles in 3 different ways. Everything that we do in neurolanguage coaching has a reason. Every part of the structure, the way we ask questions, the way that we focus into breaking it down, all leads back to the research. The second way that we integrate the neuroscience is by speaking with the learner about it, talking with the learner about the brain, what's happening, how we learn. And thirdly, trying to bring in that metacognition, that self-observation, that self-reflection, so that they start to understand how they need to learn. We're coming from the perspective of how the brain reacts, how the brain learns. We're adapting to neurodiversity, and we're bringing in the emotional intelligence and the neuropsychology as well. So from this perspective, how do we deal with pronunciation? Well, firstly, I actually think that pronunciation is a very sensitive topic. What do you all think? And it can be very triggering. So we're dealing with something that could potentially trigger people because of fear, feeling intimidated, embarrassment, ashamed. We feel stupid, especially as adults. Kiddies, okay, sometimes they don't realize, but as adults, I think all of us get into that embarrassed moment. I will never forget when I was in Germany. Oriane, you're going to laugh at this one. I could not pronounce the oo. Not only could I not pronounce it, I couldn't even hear it. This was 20 years ago when I was the first time ever I was in Germany. I couldn't hear the difference. So this person was saying to me, ooh, and I was going, you, ooh, you. And we had this total 10 minutes of, I can't hear the difference. And I got to the point where I got angry and frustrated. And I said, please stop. Please don't hammer me anymore. And that's what we need to become very, very sensitive about. Because if we've got a learner going into fight or flight, we've lost them. So I would actually have a chat about pronunciation with the learner and really ask permission, may we talk about this? How do you feel about having to learn how to pronounce, making sounds that are maybe going to be really strange for you? How do you want to approach this? And try to see if you can get them to start to bring out what they want and what they don't want, especially what they don't want. And also that permission, can we talk about neuroscience? Can we talk about how we produce language? Now, interestingly, there is a little bit of a myth about language production. The myth is that we're left hemisphere focused only with language, but actually no, right hemisphere is very, very important for processing foreign speech sounds at the beginning of learning. And afterwards, then that side diminishes and there's more that left role kicking in. But in fact, I've just done a little sort of a map of all the areas that are involved with language learning. And in particular, you know, we're looking at all the different things: speech, language development, comprehension, grammar, etc., vocabulary, memory. And honestly, right hemisphere is also bringing that connection of effective communication coming in. So there's a lot of areas for language learning, and obviously speech production and pronunciation is a great part of a language. It's an essential part to be understood. There's a beautiful book which is called Pronunciation is in the Brain, Not the Mouth. And this particular author really goes into the fact that drilling and repeating actually is not effective, and it may not bring the memory retention that you want. And he actually shares the pathway. You've got perception, which is the feeling and sensing the presence of a sound, a certain sound. Then you've got the recognition. So that includes perception and distinguishing that sound, and even maybe identifying differences with others. After that, you've got perception and recognition together, which is awareness, and then you've got production. Now, one thing to be very, very clear, we are using different neural networks to read and understand and listen to a language than speaking. So speaking actually also involves motor areas. So we have to understand that we are dealing with different networks, and many, many times we've got so many clients who can read and understand perfectly and write fantastically, but then they can't speak and they can't pronounce, and they've got terrible problems in that production. It's a big step, very big step. And also passive learning to active, that's what we're looking for, that step. I think one thing that we all know, and that's what I've just demonstrated with my problem with the U, is that some nationalities do have problems pronouncing sounds that do not exist in their native language. And I think one of the biggest messages that we have to give to our learners is, this may not exist in your language, and therefore your brain may not recognize this sound. And just by sharing that information, you may be calming your learner down, because you're really giving them that permission. There's no reason for you to really know and recognize this sound at all. So it's necessary to talk to them about the fact that as a child, our brain is obviously absorbing our native language sounds. And the greatest example is the research with the Japanese and also the Chinese, with the difference between the R and the L, which for the Japanese brain is exactly the same. That sound in their brain has no distinction. So they cannot tell the difference between those two sounds. And definitely, I think this is one of the greatest messages that you can explain. Your brain does not know the difference. And what we have to do, we have to bring in this information to the brain and create new neural networks from scratch, like a child. And that means we have to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And we have to get the brain recognizing it and recognizing it and recognizing it. Now, that particular research, we could transport that into other languages, like the Italians do not recognize the W sound in English. The Spanish don't either. Me as an English person, I don't recognize the German with umlaut. So it's about understanding and giving that message to the learner so that they can understand the process that they're going to be facing in front of them with certain sounds that do not exist in their native language. Now, Edward Odishu in his book, he actually really promotes the fact that we need to understand and know their native language. And I totally agree with this. We need to understand which sounds exist, which sounds don't. Where are they going to have the problems? Where are they not? That is absolutely key so that we can highlight differences, similarities, and we can really say, this is a problem area for you because. And also, as I was with my German sounds, we can be psycholinguistically deaf to the sound. Absolutely, we may not hear it. So one of the techniques that I use is actually getting to write words as they are pronounced. And the technique is that you are literally writing that word in their native sound so that they can pronounce it. Now, how many of you do that as well? Just give me a quick hands up. Yeah, I think a lot of us do that. And, you know, I'm curious if anybody knows what that last, I've put there comfortable, which you can all read that. What about the one which is LOR? What is that word that I'm trying to get my learner to say? Yay, Julie, absolutely, but that's because you're English. We should have got a non-native English to do that, because, you know, that particular word, L-A-W, law, I've heard it pronounced in so many unusual ways in Italy and Spain and in other languages. And it really is literally the sound of L-O-R, law. Very soft R at the end, but that sort of focus of the mouth going into that sound. Personally, I've found that that's one of the best ways that my learners connect into how to pronounce words. Much more than going into pronunciation exercises and repeating and anything else. They instantly see it and get it. Now, may I suggest that sometimes you may not know how to write that word. And that's happened to me in the past. So I sit with my learner and I say, right, let's do this together. Let's work out how to write this as it sounds for you. And I get them to help me, literally. And together we work it out. And they create the word so that it sticks as a sound for them. So that would be really one of the tips. Now, if you do not know their native language, obviously you can't go that extra mile, but you can try to, again, have a conversation with them. How would you transcribe this in your letters, in your language? Virginia, that must be extremely difficult for Chinese learners and any learners with a different script, like Arabic, Russian, Ukrainian, whatever. But again, it's not impossible. If you can get them to put it in their symbols, their letters, it's going to help them. Now, another thing that is very, very interesting, and we know this in the research, it's called the McGurk effect. Now, I know that some of you who have done the advanced course with me, we actually discussed this quite deeply. And I've given you the link there to the YouTube video and also the link to the paper. So with pleasure, do have a look at those afterwards. And we know that the McGurk effect is when the auditory actually is influenced by what we see. So it highlights the importance of being able to see what we are saying and how we're producing that sound. Can you imagine 2 years of mask wearing in language sessions? How difficult this has been, how we've taken away that visual impact from sound. So now that we are mask-free, I would suggest that we really speak to the learner about this and say, you know what, your visual will override your sound. So it is going to be important that you visually see me when I say something. And if there's a problem with a word, it's going to be very important that you see how and where my mouth is, my lips are, everything. Now, again, I would actually check with your learner if they want to go deeper than that, if they want to really have a reproduction, you know, where you're showing them, right, the tongue is here, this is here. Personally, as a language learner, I find that very embarrassing and painful. And personally, I don't like that. But you may have a learner who really does want to see, okay, what's happening here? What's happening there? How does the mouth go? Let's try it together. Let's play with it. The answer comes from the learner, definitely. And audio visual is the best training that there is. Now, you can explain about the McGurk effect. You can show them the video. Actually, it's a video where you have a gentleman who is saying ba and fa. And there really is that question of whether he is saying one or the other, because all the way through, he's literally always saying ba, ba, ba. But because you see his lips doing that, the brain thinks he's actually saying fa. But he's not. He's saying ba. It's phenomenal. It really is. Do have a look at that. Now, I would share that video with learners and express, you know, this is the importance, and share about visual reinforcing auditory. Yes, it's great to listen, but sometimes it might be a little bit better to watch videos. So having a little bit of both. So podcasts, etc. Yes, but how about now and again, you do some video clips too. And talking about neuroplasticity, new neural connections do not happen overnight. They require, firstly, awareness, and then they require practice and consistency and perseverance. Now, one of our coaches was actually working with some clients in the US who were brilliant accountants. And the accountant firm actually connected with us because, as brilliant as they were, they had clients that couldn't fully understand them with their Chinese accent. They were Chinese. And they spoke brilliant English, but sometimes there were key sounds and words that just needed polishing. So we had a 2-month program to help them identify the sounds, work into which are the words, how do we get you into, you know, really understanding that you need to create new neural networks, you need to understand where the mouth is going, what's happening. And literally they created their own plan, and their own plan at home, because consistency means you have to keep doing it at home. And there could be, you could have clients, you know, when you really ask them, okay, what could you do at home to consolidate this? And one of the ladies actually said, I can sit in front of the mirror 10 minutes every day. Brilliant. because there you've got that visual and you're doing it and you're keeping doing it. And these are the ideas that you want your coachees to have, to create their plan. And honestly, in 2 months, it was coming. It was getting better. The clarity was coming in much, much more. And you could be really getting them to brainstorm all sorts of different things. Maybe they've got a partner that they can spar with, and maybe they've got somebody they can soundboard with. And in neurolanguage coaching, when you're doing those goal settings, we also need to understand, are we looking at pronunciation of sounds, or are we looking at accents? Are we looking at connected speech? Are we looking at intonation? What are we looking at? And I think it's fascinating as well. You may have somebody who doesn't want pronunciation, but they do want connected speech. Connected speech is essential when you start to come into more and more speaking languages. And definitely understanding the different types of connected speech. So the I have an apple, the linking, the did you, a new sound, the go in, the next week, where you're losing sounds. You know, there are different examples that you can really have. I had a beautiful, beautiful engagement with a pilot from Italy. And my pilot from Italy was actually suffering from terrible fight or flight, because his whole career as a pilot was resting upon him taking his English exam. Because obviously as a pilot, you have to be able to speak English. Now, one of the major problems that he had was that all of the exams nowadays, and I don't know if it's the same for all companies, but many airlines, they are using automated programs as the test. And he had brilliant English, by the way. His problem was accent and accent reduction. He had a lot of native interference with his sounds, heavily Italian sounding. Now, we worked together for about a year. And to the extent that I actually did the exam to find out what is in the exam. What is it what's the reason that you're failing here? So I paid and I did the exam, obviously not as a pilot, but to really understand the different parts and to identify where are the problems. Is it the individual sounds? Because he obviously has to also explain things, approaching the runway and which runway and all of this that you have to do when you're landing a plane. So is it the individual sounds? Is it the words? Is it the linking connected speech? And most of the time, it really was for him the problem of the intonation and the connecting speech. But we attacked it from different ways. Now, you can attack pronunciation bottom up, where you're literally going into individual sounds first, diphthongs, vowels, etc. And there I would say that would come under, from my feeling, it would come under the mechanics of language. It's what brings the language together, the nuts and bolts. You need the sounds to make the words. And we did focus on the really difficult sounds for him in Italian. And really focusing on words that sounded the same. And coming into patterns of words and sounds. And then patterns of vowels and diphthongs and triphthongs and all of that. Secondly, we then went into that question of top down. So really looking at the chunk of speech, which we're then breaking down. And there you've got that rolling connection of what's going into what. And if he's saying a sentence, because sometimes he had to repeat sentences And you know, the machine must have been so sensitive that if he just got one wrong connector, he failed. By the way, he did pass in the end. And he actually then progressed to becoming a captain. So he's out there flying in the world. So, connected speech, top, down, I would say is more mastery. You can decide where you're going to put this. Again, you can ask your learner, what do you want to focus on? Are we coming into individual sounds? Are we coming into chunks where we're really getting you into those chunks? And what are the concrete goals? And again, here, you can't just have my pronunciation. What does that mean? Let's break it down. Let's really get you focused, because what are the let's say, the sounds that don't exist in your language? Where are your difficulties? And get them to really pinpoint exactly what they want to have as those focus goals. The next question is going to be, how do you want to work on the goals? What is it that you want to do? I've had people in my language learning experience who wanted me to do exercises, warming up my mouth and all this sort of thing. Honestly, I'm the type of learner that if that happens, I want to crawl under the table and I don't want to be there. So again, you need to check in with your learner before jumping in and suggesting. Ask the learner what they want and what they do not want to do. Now, I actually think that there are different types of learners. And I'm curious what you all think to this. I am the type of learner that I love to go into a language kind of like head on. I don't want to separate out pronunciation. I want to come into the words. I want to come into the verbs. I want to come into the grammar. I want to come into talking and doing. But I don't want to sit there going into pronunciation. And this is how you do this. And you know, starting off where you're giving people sounds, again, I would really check in, is that something that your learner wants to do? Because some language courses, they give you, and the books, of course, they give you, this is how you sound everything. And for some people, it's painful and it's boring. And some people want to get into the words and pronounce them and use them and play with them. And that's what we do as children. We play with sounds. We play with words. And I would suggest that what we need to try to do is get the joy into pronunciation and not the pain. And to play with it so that it's fun. Activities, well, you might create a list of a menu of activities. You know, if your learner says, well, I've got no idea how to work on my pronunciation. Okay, well, how about we brainstorm then a little bit? You know, we can really sit and brainstorm and identify the sounds. We can create games with word lists that you're playing with or you're changing and swapping. We can do like native target comparison sounds. We could do exercises if that's what you want. We could get words and sentences that you guess, and then we kind of have some videos where we're checking and seeing. You could have a little bit of a clip of something that we're listening to, and then you guess what are the sounds in each one, what are the letters coming out there. So there are things that you could create like a little menu and get imaginative and see what the learner wants and what can the learner do alone. And that question again is for them, like our Chinese clients in the US who wanted to practice in front of the mirror. And by herself, she was doing it. Yes, Carla, with kiddies, definitely lots of activities, games and videos. Now, it's very difficult and it's very different kiddies learning a language and adults learning language. So kiddies often absolutely embrace the fun, the games, the curiosity, etc. And we're looking at kiddies between 0 and 7 years old. From the age of 7, 8 onwards, then we start to go into that embarrassment. Teenagers, we've got the amygdala driving in life and absolutely emotionally engaged and emotional pain all the time. And as adults as well, we've got that feeling of embarrassment, shame, etc. So it's different with kids under 7 and kids over 7 and adults. Now, just as an anecdote, this is a recent research in 2020. And I found this by accident when I was doing a little bit of research today on pronunciation. Apparently they did some research where they had people pronouncing some words, and then they had people listening to other people pronouncing words badly. And it seems that we can hear the errors that other people make, but actually we don't hear our own. And we actually, each and every one of us, think that our pronunciation is better. So that was a little bit of an anecdote research that I found this afternoon. I don't know if that's true in all cases, but it seems to be in this particular study, it definitely was. Quite interesting. So really, my conclusion is that we definitely talk about the brain in respect to pronunciation. You help them to lose that shame by giving them the science of the reason for not being able to pronounce something or not recognize something, and finding it difficult to produce that sound and to maintain that sound. And then every single answer should come from the coachee. Everything is about you asking the right questions when you're doing the goal setting, when you're doing the action setting, and you're finding how they want to deal with that topic. Now, apart from that, I'm going to say that you all have your expertise with pronunciation, exercises, or linguistics, or whatever in the background. And if you can bring in more input with permission, asking the learner, may I share with you a little bit of my experience? May I share with you what some people enjoy? May we put together like a menu of my experience with things that work, things that don't work, and everybody's different. And allowing them to find their way through this. How many of you would say that you have learners that don't want to touch pronunciation? They just want to go into the language with the words. Yes, Julie, Britta. No other people? And people who really want to come into pronunciation? Yes? Right, right, okay. And just out of curiosity, anybody like to share how you handle that when they say, yes, I really want to go into the pronunciation? Anybody want to jump on the mic? Yes, Kathy, I'm going to get you to unmute there.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me yet?
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I often encounter this situation with advanced learners who already have a terrific pronunciation and they don't believe me when I say, well, it's okay, we can understand everything. You have foreign influence, we can hear you're not from here, but it's not a problem for communication. But I hear that you want to work on that. And my problem is because I think it's mostly a social pressure or something that's more deeply rooted, but I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm a coach. So that's sometimes very hard to navigate. What do you think about that?
How do you normally handle it then?
well, if they want to work on it, we work on it. So I handle it as you presented, with a connected speech, or well, those sounds, maybe you're a little longer than you should on those vowels from a typical French pronunciation perspective. But then there's another problem, and as I wrote in the comments, many people want to correct the pronunciation, but when we get to do the work, and I have a variety of techniques that I apply, but when it's not working, at some point we have to stop. Like, it's not perfect and everybody gets frustrated, or sometimes they make progress, but they don't realize it. So it's very sensitive for sure.
It is. And I honestly, maybe I can connect that back in with what I did with the pilot. Before we did any work on pronunciation, I asked him if we could talk about fight or flight. And I asked him if we could talk about the sort of trigger of, well, he really was suffering emotional and social pain, not only from the exam, but also from other crew members making fun of him. And there, he shared that with me, and honestly, I could really sense the pain. So I asked, may we talk about the brain? May we talk about fight or flight, emotional pain, social pain? So he recognized this was what was happening. And I think sometimes, Kathy, that could be also in cultural situations, that social pain could be a topic we could really talk about with our learners, and just checking in, you know, how are you feeling about this situation? And one thing, when that happens, actually, if we go into fight or flight, we probably pronounce even worse. Because we've gone into a blocked brain, the brain isn't really fully functioning, we're not able to think, etc. I know that when I'm in a fight or flight, I get tongue twisted. Even if I'm fluent in the language, it won't come out. So talking about the brain, talking about the fight or flight, checking in with them, and then I would take in a different conversation, what strategies could you build in that situation? And my pilot actually came up with some strategies of actually asking them, well, what languages do you speak? And more often than not, he was with English people who spoke no other language. And that kind of reinforced him to feel better. That was what he wanted to sort of check in. Well, what languages do you speak? Okay, well, you don't speak, no, I'm trying to speak English. And sort of calming that situation for him. Kathy, that might not work in a cultural situation, but obviously it's about them building in what strategies could they build in if they go into that fight or flight. And then from there, then that question of, okay, I'm hearing you want us to work on the pronunciation. How much do we need to do? And at what point are we going to stop and try to then get it into natural language? So yes, I think again, if you are sensing that it's not going anywhere, to have that coaching conversation with the client and say, okay, how are you feeling about the progress? What are you noticing? Where are we now with this? How much more do you want to do with this? And just checking in on that side. Yeah. Does that help a bit, Kathy? Oh, do I have to unmute you again? Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, and I muted myself again. Yeah, it helps for sure. And I think some people sometimes have unrealistic expectations of, we all have an accent, and even if I focus very hard and I speak slowly, I can sometimes, you don't hear that much that I'm French, but it will come back. I will be a bit more passionate about something, and then you'll hear the French accent. It's really hard, especially if you're if you combine languages on a daily basis, you're not 100% immersed in one language.
Yeah.
I think people have to realize, like, talking about the brain, let them know that, well, that's a bilingual brain. That's what it is.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it could be a good question, you know, how would you like to sound? And getting them to put their sort of standard of where is their marker of accent, no accent, and okay, if you want to be accent free, how are you going to work on it?
You know about that, it reminds me of something I do with my learners who do that. It's and it comes back to the McGurk effect. I think there's something connecting the visual, the production of sounds. I show them Jodie Foster speaking French and Jodie Foster speaking American English.
Yeah.
It's not the same person.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, which one do you want to be? Or how, on that scale of Jodie Foster 0, Jodie Foster 10, where do you understand?
Yeah.
And it's amazing how we change physically when we speak a different language.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, even from the research, they say that we assume a different personality. And I definitely can vouch for that. I'm bordering on schizophrenic, I think, when I go into Spanish, Italian, French, German, Catalan. Definitely there's a different approach and a different sound and even a different energy coming out of me in those different languages. And I know it's the same for all of you. Julie, yes, let me unmute there. No, just unmuting.
Yeah, hello, sorry, hi. This is fascinating. This is what I love doing. Something that I've observed, and I'm not sure, I've never read much into the science around it. Maybe you can talk about this, but a lot of my coachees who are adamant that they don't want to work on their pronunciation, usually they're very stressed and, you know, they don't care. Yeah. And we tend to go into the conversation about their fight or flight that comes from when they can't understand native speakers. And we have a moment where they get, you know, angry and frustrated because they can't understand, and they push it back and say they're speaking too fast, they're not making an effort, they're, you know, I can't understand them. And we come around to the pronunciation by saying maybe one of the reasons that we can't understand is because your pronunciation is very different. For example, if you think the word idea is ide, when somebody says idea, you're going to think of the word dia, like share. Yeah. And a lot of my students have come around to working on pronunciation after identifying those characteristics, those linking words, not really accent. I agree with Kathy. I tell them, please keep your accents. You know, it's all about word stress, linking the words. What do people do? Yeah. And once they start copying them, and we do shadowing, they copy, they imitate, they take a line and they come back and try to do with the face expressions, the body language. And then suddenly everything clicks and they want to work on pronunciation. But I don't know if, you know, if it's chicken or egg. I don't know if how I should be explaining it to them, but yeah, if you see what I mean.
I do. And I think, you know, the answer is coming from them. Mm. And I think it really is that question, always trying to wind back to the pain. And that's what you've said, you've done. You've identified they've got emotional pain. Many people in businesses are working in companies where the lingua franca is now imposed as English. So you've got a tremendous trigger of unfairness already. We hate the language even before we've started. Because we're being imposed to use this language. And the next thing is you've got, and you know, I'm putting my hand up because I'm British. We've got many Native American, British, Canadian, the native English population who do not have language sensitivity. And when I say language sensitivity, I mean they just speak without even considering that there are people in the room who are maybe learning, or they don't understand, or it's too fast. So there has to be, and I think, and I've worked with a lot of top executives about how to handle meetings with different nationalities. Absolutely. And one of them is opening up the space to language sensitivity. And what signals could be brought to the table when somebody speaks too quickly, or they're not speaking clearly, and just devising that sort of, okay, you know, even just a show of a hand, which will make people realize and become sensitive.
Yeah.
And we always come back to metacognition, sensitivity.
One of the things that calms them down and helps them to overcome this resentment and real anger, they get frustrated. I often hear, you know, they're not making an effort, is when they think about it in their own language. For example, in French, when you to say we have an hour, we would say on a une heure, and it would all be linked. And I tell them, I said, try to break it down so you're only saying each individual word. And, sorry, and they realize that it's so unnatural to say on, a, une, and I said, that's what native speakers are doing. It's on a, even if you say it slowly. And this really helps them to go, the aha moment. Yeah, that's why I don't understand it.
That's right. Yeah.
Sorry, somebody is at my door. I have to come back to
No problem. So coming back, just to unpack a little bit what Julie was saying. Firstly, if you're dealing with unfairness, and if you're dealing with no language sensitivity, that's triggering the fight or flight. So again, with these learners, I would be talking about fight or flight and triggers. And what strategies do you need to build to help you when that happens? So if you're in the middle of a meeting and that's happening, what could be done to change that situation? Is it something that could be done externally with the other participants, or is it something that we need to then work on with your pronunciation, accent, connected language? Okay, and identifying what needs to happen. Now, the other thing that you said there, Judy, just to unpack, yes, native target connections. Yes, understanding that the same word can be in many languages, but it's the same word. Preparación, preparación, preparazione. Preparazia. It's the same word. But the problem is that if their brain is not tuned in to understanding that it's the same word, you might be saying televisión, televisione, and somebody might say, what on earth is that? It's a television. So it is about helping them to understand that if they can just start to understand the basic sounds of that language, their brain would start to decipher, even if they don't know the word, but it's the same as the cognate in their languages. They start to get it like idea, idea. It really is the brain recognizing those words and helping them to say, well, you know what, once your brain starts to recognize it, you'll go faster because your brain starts to decipher much more and pattern sounds and pattern words. And absolutely, absolutely. So yes, Judy, I think that's a fantastic idea of yeah, your brain doesn't recognize the sound, but it's the same word. And really going into those discussions of how they can connect more with native target connections. And I know neurolanguage coaches, this is what we do all the time. Because we know that the brain is a connection machine. The brain is a patterning machine. And that's how we learn as children. Definitely. I've said it before and I will say it thousands of times. My greatest mistake as a child was the bring, brang, brung. Why not? If it's ring, rang, rung, why isn't it bring, brang, brung? Sounds the same. So I can see other people smiling there. I think you had the same mistake there, Donna, huh? Yes, and Heather. Yes. Stacey, let me unmute you. There you go.
Hi. Yeah, I was laughing because I have bilingual children and they speak English mainly with me, and my 15-year-old still says brung. He's doing it on purpose now, though.
Yeah, I brung it, Mum. Yes.
But it's amazing that though my kids actually, it's amazing me how they show me how their brains manage to deduce, you know, how these patterns. Yeah. They show me that every day, so that's pretty amazing. My question was actually about this research when you were talking about the fact that we like seem to change personalities when we speak different languages, that that really like severely intrigued me, and I've been searching for information on that. And you said that there is research out there, or there's studies out there, and so my question is just like, I'm really curious. I can't find enough information that to satisfy my desire to understand what happens in our brains. So my question is, can you please share some stuff with us?
I'll try and do it. I'll try and multitask in the background and get the link for that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's also research demonstrating that when we speak a foreign language, we don't have so much emotional connection with it either. And this is why they recommend that you should negotiate in your target language, because you don't get so involved. And this is why we can all swear so happily in a different language and it doesn't affect us, because we don't have the emotional connection that we have with the native. So that's also intriguing research as well. Yes, I'll try and see if I can get the links on there. And if not, we'll put the link in the email that we send you afterwards.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just really, really, really inspiring and interesting. And I think that understanding that what's happening can give us some ideas on how to coach better too. And yeah, come to people. I'm sure the answers are, some of the answers are there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And sharing it with the learners. This is the thing. Sharing the information with the learners, talking it through with them, finding out, how do you want to manage this topic? Do you want to manage it? If you don't, fine. We'll come back to it maybe at a later stage. We're going to get you up and running with the words, with the language, and then later maybe we can see if it arises again, we'll come into this conversation again. And I think it's about de-stressing the whole topic of pronunciation.
Oh, can I just say one thing while I have the mic on still? This is just my own inexperience. When you asked earlier, you know, what's our experience with pronunciation? Personally, I don't know. I'm comfortable with certain things and not with other ones. When we get into pronunciation, I just have this thing that lights up in me. It's like, it's just too much fun for me. And I think when we get into this, okay, shall we work on it? Yes. My eyes light up. I get excited because every time I do it, I think it's because they laugh at me because I exaggerate my, expressions and everything. I light up and I think I look funny. And so it just lightens things up. We laugh. We have a lot of fun actually. So I think that, I think part of the success too is to try to, I mean, this happens naturally with me, but just to try to really bring it in really lightly and fun and try to giggle a bit. That really helps for me a lot. I love it.
And that's fantastic, and again, it really depends on the individual learner. If you've got a learner like you, great. That's great. You're running with it. If you've got a learner who is totally the opposite and they don't want to touch it, then it's about how to come into their way as well.
Of course.
So Stacey, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now we're going to shuffle on, and I just want to go through a little bit how neurolanguage coaching can also be used for exams, for kiddies, teens, and also for specialized areas. Now, we're not going so deep here because pronunciation was the main focus today, but we're just going to add the troubleshooting part. Can we use neurolanguage coaching for exams? Well, actually, yes. I have prepared, and I think many of the coaches are preparing people for exam work using what we do in neurolanguage. Now, we have a definite goal setting process. You've got the mechanical goals, which is for the grammar part. Also, you need to find out in that part, do they need to focus on corrections? Or do they need to go into more grammar areas, or both? And you're going to be creating those areas, potential goal areas, based on that, based on a diagnosis, based on where they are with the language, based on what they need for the exam as well. Then in the mastery part, that's where you're really focusing on the performance in the exam. So you need to know, what is it that they need the exam for? what is the division of the exam? Is it listening, writing? Is it speaking, reading? Is it just one of those? Is it just writing? Is it multiple choice? Is it multiple choice with listening? What is it? And then together with the learner, you're going to be trying to break those areas down. So for example, if I've got a learner who is doing a listening, and I'm going to take the example of the TOEIC. Let me just check in. Most of you familiar with the TOEIC? Teaching in communication, teaching English communication. A lot of businesses do the TOEIC across the world. And there, if you're in a listening with the TOEIC, there are different types of listening tests. So there you could focus in and say, okay, what is type 1? What is type 2? What are they looking for in each one? So we could break it down like that. We could break it down in the sense of, do they need to create tactics? So do they need to read first, quickly, before they're listening to something? Do they need to make notes first of what they're reading in the question, or underline keywords? So building up tactics as well to tackle that listening. And then if you're going to go into sort of chunks of paragraphs that they then are listening and having multiple choice questions, how are they going to deal with that? The focus of breaking it down first and then asking the question, how do we practice this? How do we deal with it? What do you need to do with each one? Is there a system that you can create so that when you get in to sit in that exam, you literally go into that automatic mode of, that's how I do it. Now there as well, I strongly suggest that you're working with past papers. And if there's any resource material that can help, what can they do at home to back up what you are doing with them in the sessions? So that the sessions with you should be very focused on practical. And when they get by themselves, then they can go into resource books, practice papers, etc. And the same if it's reading, if it's writing, if it's speaking, how can you break all those areas down into focus goals? Once you've got the focus goals, then you get them into the focused actions, and you get them to create an action plan. Now, I know quite a few of the neurolanguage coaches actually prepare people for IELTS, TOEFL, all different types of the ones that they need for university. I actually had one lady in Italy who needed it for her university degree for legal English. And again, it was about sitting with her to find out, what do you need? What are the past papers? What are the topics? What are the key words that you're needing for in specific areas? You know, it really was her and I trying to understand where she was with the topic and what she needed to acquire. And then the plan of attack. How are we going to do it? And she actually came up with the idea that she would prepare, and you know, at university she had great enormous books with each topic in English, so she prepared summaries, and then when she was with me, we went through her summaries, checking the words, checking the information, the way that she communicated, and she would do work as well, writing things, and I would be with a workflow of her sending me things and me sending them back. Now, if that happens, if you really come into workflow with a client, I strongly recommend that you do not correct their work. You just highlight the mistakes and you send it back to them and you say, how about you correct it? I'm just going to highlight where the problem is, and I'm going to get you to have a look and try and correct it yourself. Most of the time they do correct a lot of what they had wrong. There may be some that they cannot, and that's where you're going to take advantage of your sessions to then go through those more deeply. but you get them doing it. Remember that everything that we are focused on, the more that they do, the more that they learn. And it's really about us to stop doing it for them. They could be creating their own mind maps. They could be creating their own flowcharts, their own visuals. They could be really using different ways to get that material more consolidated for the exam. So that's how we would deal with exams. Now, let's just have a quick talk about neurolanguage coaching for smaller kiddies. I think I saw in the chat box earlier, and later I'll open up for questions again. I think I saw somebody asking, how do you help kiddies of 2 or 3 pronounce? Now, I'm not a child, let's say, pronunciation specialist. And I would be very sensitive to say that children who are developing, there would also need to be a little bit of caution whether it is a developmental problem. And there, I think it would be interesting to really check in if a logotherapist is needed, a speech therapist is needed, if there are certain sounds that a child is not producing at the age of 3 or 4 or 5. Again, it depends if it's a physiological question, if it's a sound question. So there are other questions to be asking if it really is a kiddie with problems. And I'm talking mostly in the native language as well. As we said earlier, you know, when you are coming into coaching for smaller children, there are certain things that you can use from the coaching perspective, but children in those years are learning through repetition, through copying, through mimicking, through experiencing, and it's totally different after the age of 7 or 8, where we are then connecting and making associations because prefrontal cortex development is kicking in. So with smaller children, yes, we can come into coaching conversations, but you have to know when to be directive and when not to be directive with smaller children. I would suggest that you can try with lots of permission. May I, can I, could we? That will also keep kiddies calm. You could try with open questions, but they may not have the capacity to understand or to rationalize them because they don't have the capacity from that perspective of the brain. But you can have sort of the asking children to connect with animals or colors or how their experiences of something to describe. If they can't give you explanations, you can try to be imaginative and get them to describe it in their own words, how they want to describe it. You can use a lot of reformulation summaries to give back so that they consistently hear you. Remember, children are learning in those ages with repetition. So reformulation, repetition is going to help them a lot. And getting them to mimic and getting them to have fun, as you said earlier. And also very clear signposting, explaining what you're going to be doing, helping them to have that certainty of now we're going to do this. Simple language, but giving them certainty all the way. And lots of recognition, lots of praise. Remember, in those years, that's when we're storing these memories. And we're storing those bad memories as well. You know, the negative experiences are coming in without filter. So it's very important as educators, how can we help them to really be imprinting positive experiences in that learning process? And I'm very, very, very conscious that in those early years, we need to move them away from any labels. So, you know, I was working with some kindergarten teachers who did the course a few years ago, must be about 5 or 6 years ago. And the kindergarten teacher realized that they were separating children out and expressing, we need to separate you out because there is a learning problem. And for me, that's really, really something that is an alarm bell, because if children at that age are sensing that they have a learning difficulty and they're being singled out and being put into a different stream, that can be a negative belief that then is continuing all through their learning life. So how can we come into those coaching conversations to help children not feel singled out, not feel that they have a problem, but more, how can I, the educator, help you to learn? And turning it around to say, it's actually me that needs to understand this and understand how to bring that message to you, the learner. So consciousness about everything that we say, everything that we do, because it's having phenomenal impact in those early years. So as we said, helping children to manage, and you can do this with baby neuroscience. There is a foundation called Mind Up, and I've spoken about this before. Goldie Hawn is the founder of this foundation in the US. For those of you who are maybe very young, Goldie Hawn is a very famous American actress, comedian. I'm trying to think of her daughter. What's her daughter's name? She's got a famous daughter as well. And somebody can put that in the chat box for me. Ilona, did you want to jump on? Kate Hudson, thank you, Heather. Yes, okay. Now, coming back to Mind Up Foundation, they actually train teachers to talk about neuroscience with children. And in 2017, they came to the conference in Edinburgh, for those of you who were in Edinburgh, and they gave us a demo. And they use a lot of puppets, and they use a lot of playing about the brain and what's happening with the brain. So honestly, we can talk to little children to help them to manage themselves, to recognize if they're going into fight or flight, if they're feeling social pain, and to get them to express to us, how are you feeling with shapes, colors, objects? What do you need at this point? Do we need to go into some breathing, some focus meditation, some mindfulness? You know, there are things that we can do with kiddies to help them come into managing themselves and becoming aware. Britta, absolutely. Music, singing, and yes, for pronunciation, music and singing is fantastic. Yes. By the way, I forgot to mention earlier, I'm just going to put it here, and I actually forgot to put it on the slides. There's also the Tomatis method. Have a look at that, everybody, because Tomatis is also about bringing in high and low pitch. And you can do exercises where you are listening from high to low, high to low, high to low, and that apparently helps increase the understanding of sound for the brain. So it helps us to learn to distinguish sounds better. And it could be for children as well as for adults. And that just reminded me, Britta, because of the music as well. Yes, and Padla, yes, video games. Well, I think it's how they're being used. You know, if they're being used, overused, that could be a question. But if they're being used with that sort of practical and inquisitive curiosity, where you're kind of using the video and then interacting and having that interaction in the middle with the coach, so that it's just not them sitting watching videos and doing games by themselves, but they have that interaction, that healthy interaction with the coach afterwards. And the coach asking those questions to see what they've learnt and how it was and what have they noticed, and getting them into those focused learning points. So just to wrap up Ask children what they like, try to get them into some goals and focus, but there might be a little bit more teacher input with smaller children. Ask them what activities they want to do and see if you can get a mix of activities. Who likes visual, who likes kinesthetic, who likes auditory, who likes the mix, who likes music, who likes dancing, all sorts of things. Really getting them to engage with the emotions, understanding that you're going to be with that constant repetition, correction with repetition. Get them learning by doing, get them doing it, get them going shopping with each other, pretending, acting, and real, relevant, personal really helps the brain to learn, connecting in. And remember, children in those years are creating patterns in their brains, so help them with that patterning as much as you can. And also, how can they become a little team? How could they create a team spirit? How can they help each other? How can they check in on each other? If they notice one person is not feeling very well or they're a little bit sad, how can they go up and say, hey, how are you today? And really building that cooperation, collaboration, and team spirit with kids. And that way also is going to help with that social cohesion and less of the social pain. Now, teenagers, let's just go 10 years down the line. Yes, we can use coaching and neurolanguage coaching with teenagers effectively. I would say that teenagers actually appreciate the fact that we talk to them like adults. We really use the non-directive approach. We're not telling them what to do. We're using that active listening, reformulating, summarizing. You're having compassionate conversations with solution focus. You're reformulating permission questions, signposting, open questions, and never, never, never with teenagers asking the question, why? Always asking the question, what is the reason for? So that you get them into the rational response rather than the emotional defensive response. And definitely with teenagers, how do they want to learn? What activities do they like? What do they not like? Get them to share their emotions if they will. If they don't, it doesn't matter. Real, relevant, personal, again. Provoking connections, target native all the time, and learning through association in that way. And again, with teams of teenagers, how can they work together? How can they get maybe one group goal? If you've got a classroom of teenagers, how can they help each other? What can they do to be a team? What can they do to help each other? And that way, again, you're getting them on board. And let's go back to pronunciation. If you've got a classroom full of children learning a language, I would actually open up that discussion. How do you all feel speaking these sounds, which maybe sound silly, or let's bring out all the emotions of how you all feel with this. And get them sharing and opening up. I feel silly, I feel stupid, I feel embarrassed, I feel ashamed. Get them with the emotions out on the table. And then, what can we do to help you feel better here, all of you? What can we do to create a safe space so nobody feels silly? Because we're all in the same boat here. We're all learning this language. We've all got to come into these sounds and open the discussion with the group. Finally, just as a additional sort of, I'm going to say, question, can we use neurolanguage coaching for specialized areas? Well, actually, I think we can use coaching for anything. The secret is how you are asking those questions. So if you have a specialized client in an area that you have no idea about, the mastery goal setting is going to be very focused on them explaining to you what they do, what language they use, and you trying to decipher what's the functional language that they are using. And your questions are going to get those answers. You know, I always say that if our clients want us to be walking encyclopedias, fine. Then they can pay perhaps $500 the hour like they do to lawyers, because they expect us to know everything. Conversely, if we can really sit in that space and find out from the learner and say to the learner, you are the expert, I'm here to transfer that expertise into this language, but I need you to help me to understand what you need in this language. And then we go through that process of really finding out, may I ask you to share about your job? What is it that you do? And if you don't know something, may I ask you to explain it to me? I remember 20 years ago sitting with electrical engineers and people who worked in an electricity firm. I hadn't got a clue how you produce electricity. So I actually asked them, please take me through the process. How do we get electricity out of a light switch? And that's how I learned, by asking them, and then by finding a way of, okay, what is it that you need to be able to say in English? What is it that you need to be able to explain? What type of language are you going to be using? Now, I do suggest that if it is an area that is wild and woolly for you, that you go away and maybe do a little bit of research. I've done research in the past a little bit about the company, about the production of electricity, about finding flowcharts to help me to understand what they were telling me. So a little bit of research from your side afterwards could also help you to come in. But the golden help will be, what material can you bring in that's going to help you and me in this process to get you up and running in English or in the target language? And more often than not, they have a lot of material. Now, obviously, it's going to be sensitive, confidential, so you're going to have NDAs, confidentiality agreements, but that is going to be your greatest help to find out what they need when they can bring in materials and information, journals, articles. So you could also search for additional material. You could also see if there are focus points where you can come into, like clusters of vocabulary or associations, etc. You could find out really where the importance is. You can understand from that how to then chunk it down, even how to simplify it. And then with that client, how are they going to measure this progress? So what is their focus goal or goals? Ingrid, you're saying you confirm that. You've got a group of legal employees and you've really found out. Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely. And they do. They have a lot of their own materials. Now, here are some specialized areas. I'm sure some of you might be working with some other weird and wonderful. Heather, I know you're with the medicals and the psychologists. And it could always be interesting, by the way, to niche into certain areas. I know there are quite a few coaches that do niche into financial. Anna, I know that you're a financial specialist. There are some legal English specialists, so it could be interesting to find out if you want to niche into an area. And nowadays, you know, when I started with a lot of the executives and business people 22 years ago, these books didn't exist. These resource books did not exist then. Now they do. Now they do. You've got books on everything. So have a look. If you've got somebody who has a really special area, then see if there are some resource books available, even in other languages. I remember years ago, I found one in German for human resources. It was brilliant. And it was kind of like a hybrid. It had mostly, it was German text, but then they had certain conversations in English and German. Fantastic. So I think most of you now know me, and you know that I always say we're not there following a book. And I'm not suggesting that here either. What I'm suggesting is that you have this material to help you to understand their topic. So this is more for you to understand what areas they might need. Even just going through the index is going to give you an information of this is what a human resource manager will need. And then just going through some of the books have some great focus points. You could use that as the trigger to go into your session and say, right, focus point today, this, and you get them talking about it. So the books are fantastic triggers for us to be able to then stimulate and provoke in our sessions with our learners. And I have to say, some of them also have some brilliant case studies. Brilliant case studies, which you can then bring out for them to do. Some of them, I'm trying to remember the name of it, Market Leader. I think some of you might know that book. I think Market Leader, after every chapter, has a case study. And you don't have to, you can just replicate it. Get your learner with the scenario. Maybe you've got a marketing executive and it's a case study on marketing, and you can replicate that case study and go and do it. And in your sessions, the learner is actually going through that case study. Elizabeth, great to see you. You've got a specialist in GDPR. Wow, that must be heavy going. Definitely, but brilliant that you're helping that person to come in there. Yes, yeah. Benacer, you're asking me the origin of language and the relationship between variety and dialect. I'm not sure if I understand you mean the actual origin of the language in the brain, or if you mean the origin of language as in how we went from the primitive to then speaking. And honestly, I'm not a specialist in the origin of language, so I'm afraid I'm going to say that I'm going to pass on that question at this point. Now, everybody, this is my conclusion for all of you. Everything that we've spoken about this evening, whether it's to do with pronunciation, whether it's to do with going through exams, whether it's to do with having kiddies or teenagers or specialized clients. Oh, and you can see that I've made a spelling mistake there. The answers will come from your learner, not from. The answers will come from the learner, and that is really my conclusion with everything in coaching. The focus is them finding their pathway forwards. And you finding out, asking the right questions, going through those coaching conversations, having that interaction. That's the magic of coaching, definitely. And you're co-creating a process, and you're adapting and personalizing the process to each and every learner. That's what you're doing. Now we're coming to conclude. We've been rolling for an hour and a half. And as you all know, my webinars normally go over time, so we always normally do more than an hour. How can neurolanguage coaches help? Well, definitely increased sensitivity, definitely the respect for the individuals, adapting to each learner, definitely the understanding about the brain and helping the learners to understand the brain, understanding how to communicate as well. And we do have a beautiful, beautiful network. Some of you are here this evening, always wonderful. to see you, and always wonderful to welcome new people into the network. We are now a growing community, and we do have a lot of free webinars, workshops. We have got Foundation, which is setting up in the background, and we do have the conference every year. We'll be sharing information about that over the next months. And if you are interested to become a neurolanguage coach, well, there are many here that could give you some testimonials and some sharing of how it's been for them. We do have some courses starting, and with pleasure do have a look at the link on the website. We've now got, I believe, I need to count, by the way, I don't know fully. I think we've got 35 teacher trainers all over the world, and we're now delivering in 12 languages. We've got some of the teacher trainers here with us. We are delivering in French, Spanish, Italian, German, Polish, Czech, Slovakian, Arabic, Russian, Ukrainian, Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Greek is coming up soon, Romanian, Bulgarian. Amazing group of teacher trainers out there in the world. If you would like further information, do check in. And just to let all of you know, it's quite easy to get a 50% discount on our course price. If any of you are interested, do connect with us and we can send you that information.